All right, so today I want to make a quick video going over the 60-yard dash and how some of the data points that we get from it can be utilized to improve our athletes' performance. So if you've been around baseball at all, you've played baseball or you work in baseball, you've undoubtedly seen and or done the 60-yard dash test. It's a very common test used in showcases, combines, and tryouts to measure an athlete's straight line speed over the course of 60 yards. Now, there are some questions in terms of its use and validity as a evaluation tool, namely because baseball in itself is a primarily acceleration-based game. It's very rare that you're going to be running any distance greater than 30 yards or 90 feet in a straight line. Now, there might be some exceptions to this. Say you're an outfielder who has to go into the gap and get a ball after maybe you were playing in the opposite field gap, or you're an infielder who's drawn in towards the middle and there's a ball hitting the foul territory. But those are very one-off, rare circumstances. And even then, I'm not really sure that you're going to be covering the full 60 yards on a dead sprint. That being said, not to say this test is good or bad, I think there is important numbers and metrics that we can get from this. So simply put, 60-yard dash is what it sounds like. An athlete is going to start down here at point A. Someone is going to be on the other side down here at the 60 with either a stopwatch, or if you have timing gates that you can utilize, you also utilize those for that. It just makes it a little bit more accurate. The athlete is going to start, they're going to sprint, and they're going to get a number. So generally speaking, when we look at a good 60-yard dash time, or what's considered good, anything at or below a 6.8 is going to be considered very good. And usually the athletes that are going to hit these are your middle infielders and your center fielders. So your shortstops, second baseman. You might get an outfielder or two, left fielder, right fielder, that can hit that as well. They just happen to play in a corner. Generally speaking, our corner infielders and our catchers are probably always going to be above this, although there always are exceptions to the quote-unquote rule. So anyhow, getting into the test, what I really like to utilize is I like to utilize a split. So if I have the choice, I would use a 20-yard split as well as a 40, 50 yards, 10-yard window split. This 20-yard is going to be looking at more of the athlete's acceleration or how they produce force and strength in their first couple steps, which is going to produce a lot more correlation directly to baseball. However, with the top speed here, it's still a really good thing to take a look at and see how fast maximally the athlete is going. Because if we improve our top speed, chances are every time below that is also going to improve. So let's say one situation is an athlete runs pretty average overall 60-yard dash. Let's say they're a 7.0 to 7.2. Not great, but not terrible. However, they have a very impressive first 20 yards or a very impressive acceleration, something in the 2.5, 2.6 or below window. What that's going to tell me as a coach is that this athlete is very good at acceleration. They have a lot of strength and maximal strength in their lower body that they can use to propel themselves horizontally towards their target, which in this case would be the full 60 yards. In a game scenario, that might be just going to the next base, going first to second on a steal or something like that. So if they have a very good 20, but not a great 60, then it probably means they're going to be a little more deficient in terms of their max velocity and their max speed. And it's also worth it to look at their plyometric qualities. So things like looking at how well they do extensive and intensive plyometrics to help look at that stretch shortening cycle and to see how quickly and repetitively they can produce that strength. Now, I think it's an important delineation to make here. The amount of force that an athlete experiences in this max velocity is still incredibly great. In fact, it's probably 5+ times their body weight they're placing on one leg. So when I talk about more about strength and force in this context, I'm referencing acceleration. However, we can't say that they aren't strong if they produce a really good top speed time. So if I have an athlete that has a good acceleration and you're not great 60, then I'm probably going to take a look at adding some more plyometrics, working on some bounce, some spring to their training. On the flip side, if an athlete has a pretty decent 60-yard dash, maybe it's not great, because they need all this time to accelerate up to top speed, but it's not bad. But their 20-yard is considerably above this threshold that I want it to be at. And then that tips me off to I need to work on improving maximal strength and force production and working on acceleration mechanics with my athletes. So as you can see here, just by setting up a couple different times, even gathering just a split time and the total time, there's some pretty interesting numbers that you can come up with to be able to help your athletes improve. Now, one thing I will also mention here and alluded to just momentarily ago is, generally speaking, you have all of this time to accelerate up to top speed and only a very short window here that you're probably going to be able to utilize that maximal speed. Just without going into the physiology of everything, that maximal speed isn't something that you can maintain for very long. So another programming consideration I have is that I really want to focus on an athlete's acceleration, because that is going to set them up to probably have a better top speed. Because the better that they can get going from 0 to 100, the faster and the more speed that they can take through that, then the more speed they can carry into their fly time or their max velocity. So that's why I spend a good bit of time working on acceleration mechanics, working on maximal strength qualities, while also still touching on these more plyometric or max speed qualities. You can't really isolate them into one or the other. I think that you have to, in order to create a properly tuned athlete that's capable of performing in the sport, you need to hit all of these qualities. But for baseball players, like I said before, being that it is an incredibly acceleration-based game, I'm going to focus a majority of my training time in this acceleration window. So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into the usefulness of the 60-yard dash and some of the data points and the numbers that you can gather from it to help your athletes get better. One thing I will say, if you don't have the luxury of having a 10-yard split, or you have to choose between a 10 or a 20, I would err on the 20, just because even if I have just that acceleration time compared to their full 60-yard dash time, it's going to give me a pretty good idea of where they're at. If they have a good acceleration, but the rest of their 60-yard falls off, then there's something in here that needs to be more trained that probably goes into more of this plyometric or max speed bucket. Versus the other way around, and I've said this before, is if they have a pretty good 60, but maybe their 20 is just severe below this kind of number threshold right here, then that gives me an idea of, if I'm going to improve the 60-yard dash of this athlete, then the easiest thing for me to do is to improve their acceleration. So I think you also have to look at it from a standpoint of the low-hanging fruit and what they're going to get the most bang for their buck out of. Let me know if you have, and if anybody else has any questions. My DMs are always open. Leave comments on this video below. And